Hi, Annette. I'm so excited to be here with you, talking about job interviews, especially because I know you have this expertise in emotional intelligence, which I learned when we were together at Brown and beyond, including the workshops that we've been talking about and one we've already held. Welcome. And our topic today is reducing job interview anxiety by having your stories ready. And I love that word stories. Why don't we get started with what you and I were talking about just before our call? Sometimes you feel very ready for a job interview, sometimes less so. They both can produce anxiety, both of those situations. Go ahead and just lay on us your expertise. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Excited to be working with you again. It's been quite a little while since we finished the Brown program, and it's fun to be working together again. So thanks. Yeah, I like to think about job interviews really as a preparation. We could be so good at our jobs, and then somehow it comes to job interviewing. And even though we're experts in our fields, suddenly there's this anxiety and just it's the unknown, it's meeting with people, we have to present ourselves in a particular, sell ourselves, really. We have to sell ourselves, and that's not always fun or comfortable. And so I think it's natural. I think almost everybody experiences some anxiety leading up to a job interview because it matters. It's really important to us. We usually really want this new job. And so I think about how do we want to reduce anxiety? What are the best ways and the best tools to do it? And of course, in addition to the ones that people might be familiar with, general anxiety reduction techniques, what I wanted to focus on today is very specific to the interviewing process. And what I find that really helps the most is when individuals feel super prepared, over prepared. You almost can't over prepare for an interview. And the more prepared you are, the more almost well rehearsed you are, I think the better people perform and the less anxious they are because they feel really ready. There isn't a question that's going to throw them, or very few. Or if it does throw you, you know how to manage it. And we practice that.
Right. You even mentioned politicians as an example in debates, like matching the answer to the question, but being prepared for kind of anything that would happen in any question. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, without a doubt, that's exactly the approach. I love that way of thinking about it. If you interview a politician, it doesn't matter what you ask them. They already know what they're going to say. And so how do we do it in a way where the interviewer feels responded to, right? I mean, you don't want the interviewer to feel like you've rehearsed and aren't going to answer their questions. So how do we fine tune exactly that, what a politician does, but to do it well so that the interviewer really feels that you're answering their questions?
And to do it authentically, right?
Yes.
Because that's the thing we don't like about politician answers. So there's also that. The selling
That's
yourself has
that's the
got to
perfect
be
word. That's the
right.
perfect word to sound and not to sound rehearsed, authentic and
Right.
not rehearsed.
So
And
how do you rehearse and rehearse and rehearse and not sound rehearsed?
yeah, it's a good question. Well, what I like to do is first start out by asking sort of the candidates. I almost interview them, but it's not that kind of interview, but just tell me about, and without any agenda, just all of like successes you can think about. What's your proudest moment at work? Think about accomplishments with people, accomplishments with supervisors, colleagues, clients. And just through that interview process, people start to remember things that they did well, things that they feel really good about. We want to create sort of a bank of stories that people feel really good about and confident about when they start to remember. And people don't always remember, when you walk in and you ask them at the start of this process, can you tell me some successes that they maybe can pull one out? It's just not at people's top of mind, right? Because it's just not something you're thinking about every day on the job. You're in the detail of the job. But when you start to draw them out, like interviewing people and draw them out, people all of a sudden start to remember. If you ask particular questions, it leads you down different roads. And I like to follow up with particular questions that always lead us to a bank. And I ask people, or I tell them in advance, I want to prepare 5 to 10 really great sort of accomplishments, successes, good stories at
Mhm.
work.
Mhm.
And once we've teased that out, that could take us the full hour the first time we meet. I say to them, okay, now, you kind of have a bit of homework, go back and flush it out, write it up. And then we meet again. And then we start to really get into rehearsing it, but also fine-tuning the language of it, which
Mhm.
becomes super critical. And that's where we want to start thinking about our interviewer and what they're looking for in terms of the kind of person that they want to hire. And we try to match it to some of the job descriptions. And so I might say, okay, you have a bank of 10 stories. In this job description, bullet point number 1 says you need a particular skill. All right, which 3 stories could you potentially match to that bullet?
Mhm.
And if we go through the whole job description, we usually find that you can match. We figure out how to match, any one of these success stories to any particular, bullet on the job description or any skill. And then we think about, if there's a skill that you absolutely don't have, right? Can we match a story around how quickly you learn?
Right.
And so once people have created sort of a bank of stories and really rehearse them well, we fine tune the language, and it's at the tip of your tongue, then I say, back to your point earlier, you don't want to sound rehearsed and you want to sound authentic. Then comes the point where you have to kind of toss the paper away, right? So that you're not reading from a script. And then I start to tell people you don't want to marry yourself to any particular words. It's not an exact rehearsal like you're on Broadway, because if you do that, it'll be so hard to recall. And then you stumble, you don't sound authentic, you're searching for one particular word. So it's
Mhm.
almost like this process. There's this arc, right? Where
Mhm.
we're developing the stories, we create them, we perfect them, and then we want to say, let it go, and now start to talk to me. Tell me that story.
Right.
And, put away sort of your perfectly chosen words. And so it's sort of a process over maybe several meetings,
Mhm.
but that would kind of be one of the components of preparing for a job interview. And just to circle back to anxiety, when people feel like they have something at the ready for any question, your anxiety does go down. You just feel prepared,
Mhm.
right? So that just reduces anxiety significantly when you feel like you're walking in really prepared.
Two questions come up for me when I hear you say this. One is, how do you know which stories to match to which questions?
Yeah, mostly when people I find have, working in a particular field,
Mhm.
um, their stories will to some extent match the job description, right? Unless we're
Mhm.
doing a complete pivot, and that's sort of maybe a slightly different nuanced approach. But in general, there is some match. So what
Mhm.
I would say is almost we find that we're easily able to, once you have the 10
Right.
stories, you're
Right.
easily able to match a bullet point to a story. What I would say is which one you choose depends on how the interviewer is asking you the question. And that maybe goes into a separate topic, which is behavioral,
Mhm.
because every story that is an opportunity to shine behaviorally also. It's
Mhm.
not just content.
Mhm.
And so depending on how they ask the question, and we
And
already know because we've prepared each
right.
story which behavioral characteristics you're touching on.
And
So you're matching
just
for
so people
behavior as well as
know,
content. Yeah.
oh, behavioral, I just wanted to define it because some people might not be aware of what that is.
Yeah,
Behavioral.
so a behavioral question is where they're looking for, it's not technical skill, it's more quality, like your ability to work well with others or
Mhm.
manage conflict or manage stress on the job. So these are characteristics that they would look for any employee,
Mhm.
which is separate and apart for your particular skill that they're looking for.
Right. Right. So I love what you said because I imagine someone has 5 or 10 stories and you said, oh, that dispels anxiety. But then just hearing that without preparing, it sounds like, well, that creates more anxiety because then what do I do with these stories? But what you're saying, it sounds like, is it flows naturally once you understand kind of what you're doing in that interview room, right?
I think
What?
it does. I
Mhm.
think what I have found is just with a bit of practice over time, people can quickly see how they can match the stories. We
Mhm.
practice it. It's like
Mhm.
any skill. You're learning a skill. Politicians probably practice this a lot before they'll
Right.
take their first interview. So with a bit of practice, I'll put a question out there. I'm like, okay, which story are you going to pick? And we
Right.
talk through it. This one might be better for this reason. And so we're learning the skill.
Right. You're
And we're
learning
learning,
polish essentially, right?
yeah,
That's what the
that's
politicians have, if we think about it, or reporters, anyone who's done this a lot, right?
They do. They do have that quality. They do. And you can learn it. It's a
Mhm.
skill that you can learn. And so we practice it. And then I find that by the end of the process, they can quickly do a match that works
Right.
and sounds authentic. But yeah, you're right. It's a polished skill and we can learn it.
The other thing that came up for me when you were talking, you said, even if it's a skill that you don't have a lot to match to, you can talk about how you are a quick learner. And I love that because that's a good use of a story as well, right?
Always, you always prepare that quick. I learned quickly on the job story. You will find a place to match it, right?
Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
we say, yeah, exactly what you, to your point. Anytime they ask you a question about a particular skill, you don't have enough of that skill, or so instead of, we prepare initially, we might say, I don't have that skill. So we talk about, we kind of never want to articulate the negative, right?
Right,
We want to articulate that I'm a fast learner. That's a positive, active approach,
right,
right? And here's an example of
right. Or an
that
analogy of something I did similar. Mhm.
exactly, similar, exactly.
Yeah. So do you have any parting words?
What I would say that is that it's a different skill, just to reassure clients, it's different from being great on the job. It's just a
Hmm.
completely different skill
Hmm.
that we don't have to learn when we're on the job. And so I think just approach it as a skill I'm going to learn because I have to, because I want to succeed at landing this job.
Hmm.
And just because I may not have been great on my first interview, but just tell yourself, I know this is a skill, I can learn it and I can master it just like I master other areas of my life. And we just have to invest a little bit of time to master this very unique particular skill of interviewing for a
Right.
job. Yeah.
I love that because I think people, once they get very expert in other areas, feel like they should know how to do this. And what you're
And
saying is,
it's not the
no,
case. This is just not
right,
what we do every day on the job.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk to you more about behavioral questions that you kind of brought up. And I loved catching up with you. Thank you so much,
This
Annette.
was fun. Thank you.
Bye.